Hello, film fans. Welcome to the Film vs. Film podcast. My name is Martin Harries, your host. I'm a filmmaker on occasion, but mainly can't stop yapping about movies. On this podcast, every episode I pick a topic from a film that's coming out at the cinema or on streaming. I pick a favourite film from that topic and battle it out against a guest to decide which film will become the greatest film of all time. If you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Please enjoy part 1. Hello, podsters or podroonies, if you prefer. We are back again for another episode of the Film vs. Film podcast. And this week, we are not relating the episode to a cinema release or a streaming release. No, we are going back to our Legends episode. And this one is slightly different, because we are talking Sean Connery films, but not only Sean Connery films, James Bond Sean Connery films for our Legends episode, which is very exciting. And I have brought along with me a expert on the subject. I couldn't be more pleased to welcome Brian from the Reviewing History podcast for his second appearance. Hello, sir. How are you?
Hello, second appearance and first time not violently ill. So I'm excited to not cough and wheeze my way through one of these.
That's fine. I cut out pretty much all of the coughs and sneezes.
I had to, last time I kept hitting mute and then I was here just blowing my nose. It was gross.
It was a fun time, though, talking Lord of the Rings. Which, of course, our Return of the King topped our leaderboard for last year, which is well-deserved, I think, of course. So, Brian, tell us about your podcast and where can we find you, sir?
So, my podcast is Reviewing History. We watch movies based on true stories, and we go through them, and we tell you what's real and fake in them as we basically make dick and fart jokes. It's a fun time. It's loose. It's light. You'll learn a little. You'll laugh a lot. We also have a Patreon, patreon.com/reviewing history. There's a bonus pod there every month. There's all different tiers, but we're releasing different pods covering all sorts of different material. We have a show dealing with sci-fi movies on there, one where we're watching all of Seinfeld. We have a video game show. We have a horror show. There's going to be one about documentaries coming up. And it's a creative playground for us on the Patreon where we can kind of break format and get away from what we normally do. So if you check out the regular show, Reviewing History, that's anywhere you get your pods, and you like what you see, you can go to patreon.com/reviewing history. You could check out, see what we have coming up. I always post the month slate, and you can see if any of it interests you. For the Slasher School is our horror thing. So we've already covered Sleepaway Camp as the first one. And the second one, which is coming out shortly, is Friday the 13th. And the one after that is Leprechaun is dropping just in time for St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I talked about Leprechaun with Matt from the Matt and Mark movie show last year. That was a lot of fun. One of Jennifer Aniston's first movies.
Yep.
Yeah, and funny you should say that about slashers. Our last episode was on slashers. So we'll obviously go through our you guys' Instagram responses at the top of part 2 for your favorite slasher movies. But of course, we are talking James Bond movies, Sean Connery Bond movies. We would just have a little chat first about Sean Connery's Bond legacy in terms of the whole franchise and what it means to you being a huge Bond fan. Where does this era in Sean Connery's tenure as Bond rank to you in terms of the franchise and just cinema as a whole?
Well, I find it no, it's a great question. So I find it interesting to look at his Bond body of work. Kind of sums up almost the first third of his career, right? So we see Connery start as a young man. There's this perception now that when you cast a James Bond, he should be, late 30s, early 40s. That's how old James Bond should be. Sean Connery, when Dr. No comes out, he's 32 years old. Now, it's an older looking 32 because, he's smoking and drinking constantly, but he's 32 years old when Dr. No comes out. So,
and he has to wear a toupee.
Yeah. We see him as a young man. He's in A Bridge Too Far, and he's in The Longest Day, and like these little roles. He's almost an unknown actor, and he gets cast for James Bond as basically an unknown, and it was the right actor at the right place, and it takes him on a meteoric rise to becoming a household name. And what's funny is you could kind of see when you watch them all, and I love every Bond movie. I love every Bond performance, even Diamonds Are Forever, where like you could tell Sean Connery does not want to be there, and he's just counting the money in his head like through every take.
When am I going to get paid?
Yeah. All right, this is going to go to the Scotland fund that I'm doing, and, this is all worth it. This is stupid bullshit, and you could see it in his mind, but it's interesting to see that, like, he has a couple of rough years after he leaves the Bond franchise. He has, like, a lot of flops and stuff, and he kind of hovers around, and, he does Never Say Never Again, and I really, just off the top of my head, I think The Rock kind of brought his career back to prominence. But he had a rough couple of years where he did like Zardoz and like kind of flops. And he found his star again in the 90s, and then he regained it basically until The League for Extraordinary Gentlemen killed his passion for acting. But you could kind of track the trajectory of his feelings about acting through this movie, where it's like he starts as a young, bright-eyed, bushy-tail guy who's giving it his all, and the performances are great. And then as they go on, he's like, all right, yeah, whatever. This is a paycheck.
Yeah. Oh, they're making me Asian and you only live twice. Hey, but I quite like You Only Live Twice, though. Apart from that bit, bit strange that. But yeah, I totally agree. It's just he just brings such an incredible like presence as James Bond. I mean, these films when they came out in the early 60s were like crazy popular hits, huge smash hits when they came out. And I don't think Connery was totally prepared for that at all. I don't think anyone would really. But yeah, he's certainly said publicly that he didn't enjoy playing James Bond in the end. And also, like, Ian Fleming said that wasn't a particular like huge fan of Sean Connery in the role, because obviously they wanted Roger Moore, I think, to kick things off with the franchise, but he was still tied up with The Saint, the TV show. So they, hired Sean Connery instead, and I'm so glad they did, because he just brings this just incredible masculinity and this ease about him, just oozes style and coolness. He's definitely right up there as one of my favorite Bonds. I would probably say Daniel Craig is. I always kind of change my mind when I kind of think about who is my favorite, because Daniel Craig certainly has had some dud Bond films, in my opinion, from his career. I wasn't a huge fan of like No Time to Die from an action point of view, whereas with Sean Connery, like there's just a great effortlessness to the way he portrays James Bond. Yeah, brilliant. So shall we go with my choice first then, as it makes sense?
Chronologically, it makes sense, yeah.
So I'm going with the second James Bond film in the franchise from 1963, From Russia with Love, Terence Young's second film as director. So this one kind of had a little bit more of a budget to it after the huge success of Dr. No. So why did I go with this one? I think it's arguably considered as maybe the best one of the franchise, the whole franchise. I know my uncle, who kind of got me into James Bond, has always said that From Russia with Love is always his favorite one and the best one. So I think in general terms, I think it is considered the best movie. Whereas I think your choice, I think, has more of like the iconography of James Bond that everyone goes back to. Whereas this, I think, we'll find out, but I think this is probably the better film, maybe. I know this is your favorite film as well, you said to me.
Yeah, this is my favorite Bond film. It's my favorite in the franchise. Number 2 is Casino Royale. I consider this the best Bond movie. So many things within From Russia with Love, the Bond franchise has been trying to top for over 50 years, and they haven't been able to. You know, the
Yeah.
train fight is a masterpiece, but it's plotted so well, and it's a tight espionage thriller,
Hmm.
and it's treated seriously. It's not like a campy joke.
No.
And it's a really well told story, and it's one of the closest films to the actual book. You know, it's very
Yeah.
close. Whereas Goldfinger, I kind of think they figure out the formula, and they're like, this is how we make a giant hit. From Russia with
Yeah.
Love, I think they're like, oh, let's tell a really good story. You know, that's cool. And
Yeah.
it works. It's my favorite. The only reason I didn't pick it for this was I had done a podcast a couple of years ago talking about From Russia with Love, and I was like,
Okay.
let me pick something else so I don't have to talk about it. And I was like, Goldfinger should be picked. So I was like, I'll make sure Goldfinger's picked. And you picked. I was like, all right, it's fine.
Awesome. So what happens in From Russia with Love? Going to IMDb as always. So James Bond willingly falls into an assassination plot involving a naive Russian beauty in order to retrieve a Soviet encryption device known as the Lecter that was stolen by the organization Spectre. So initial reactions for me, like, yeah, I really love it, as of course. It's certainly not like the most like action heavy compared to a lot of Sean Connery's later Bond films. But as you say, it's like a proper like spy espionage thriller that's really tight and just really clever in all aspects that we're going to talk about in directing, acting, and screenplay, really. And it's obviously the first one where we see kind of a glimpse of Spectre, which is always really fun to see. And Robert Shaw is a really great villain as Grant. Yeah, it's just a lot to like, and some really kind of, you could argue, controversial stuff from that time happens in this film, with like the gypsy scene, with the two kind of girls fighting in that. Yeah, it's a really great like little spy thriller that I think more people should go back to when they talk about James Bond, for sure. I remember also like they brought out a PS2 or PS3 game called From Russia with Love, which I played a little bit, which wasn't amazing, but it was still kind of fun, like playing a video game as Sean Connery playing James Bond.
Yeah, it's one of Sean Connery's last like roles. He did the voice acting role for a video game remake of From Russia with Love, which I think is super cool to do.
Yeah.
You know, I actually never played it. It's one of those retro games I want to go get and finally replay it.
I've got it somewhere in the other room, in a box somewhere that needs dusting. So directing then, one thing of note that I really kind of always enjoy about these Sean Connery Bond films and some of the Roger Moore ones is that they really get into the spy stuff in terms of like just these little scenes where he goes into a hotel room and just like checks out for like bugs and little lenses and things, microphones around, and you hear the iconic music come on, James Bond's theme. So that's always kind of always a little fun scene for me. But I think the one scene of note, I think, in this film in terms of direction for me is that I really enjoyed the fight in the gypsy camp, and I liked how the scene kind of starts with the contrast with this elegant belly dancer, and then for the time quite a shocking and brutal girl on girl fight, which I mentioned, which sort of sets the tone for the fight to come, where Kirilenko, a Russian agent, and his men attack the camp. Like the pacing is really great, where it sort of starts off with Karimbe and Bond trying to kill Kirilenko, and then you have like a series of quick kills from Bond, him saving the gypsy leader, and some funny like ones too, where these two guys are like fighting on a table and Bond just tips them over into the river. Then Grant like saves Bond by shooting someone from distance as he's about to like strike Bond from behind. So I like how that thread is put in there nicely. You know, that some one's always kind of watching Bonds, but not in your like typical like Cold War way. Plus that's another thing that's gone, I feel like, from modern Bond films is the big battle scene where Bond is kind of sort of part of a team, a group of people against another group trying to kill each other. Because in modern Bond films, it always just feels like it's Bond, maybe one other person, and against a shitload of people. Whereas this, it's the gypsies versus the Russians. And I just feel like I miss those type of scenes.
Well, it's kind of Fleming. The way he wrote a lot of his books was, and a lot of the Bond movies follow this. At the end, is Bond calling in some sort of army to help him, like it happens in Goldfinger. It happens in You Only Live Twice. It happens in Diamonds Are Forever, just to name some Connerys off the top of my head. Thunderball, I'm trying to remember. I feel like it happens, but it's been a while since I watched that one. It's not one of my favorites.
So it's the submarine battle, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're not submarine. They're all
the underwater. Scuba diving.
Yeah.
Yeah, so having big battles show up and Moonraker, it happens, just off the top of my head. But it's kind of a Bond thing where there's two big armies that fight at the end, and Bond is kind of in the middle of it trying to, complete another objective or save the girl or something like that. So this movie doesn't have that at the end, but I guess this scene would kind of take the place of that, where he's in the middle of this action and, it's not even about him here. This would have happened even if James Bond wasn't at the camp.
Yeah, exactly. But do you kind of miss that, though, in like the more modern ones, the big battle scene, or not?
I don't feel like it's needed to make a good story and to make it compelling. If it would have changed the end of No Time to Die, I would have liked it. Because I'm not a fan of that ending, and it kind of soured Daniel Craig's whole tenure for me. Where, I had him neck and neck with Sean Connery before that, and you catch me on a different day, I'll tell you Daniel Craig was my favorite. But No Time to Die left me with such a sour taste that Connery is locked in to number one now for a while.
Yeah.
It's going to be hard to replace him.
Yeah. I think, story-wise, I didn't mind the ending so much, personally, but it's just the action in No Time to Die was quite disappointing. Just the way it was shot and just the whole scripting of it. I think, the whole scene in Norway, like the highlight of that is driving through a puddle, and that was disappointing. But
I like it. I like him kicking the car because it's reminiscent of For Your Eyes Only. But
yeah.
Again, he had a broken leg, if I recall, while they were filming that. So I think they cut and changed a lot of the action in the movie.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, if I recall. I could have rolled with the entire movie, but as someone who loves James Bond, it's my favorite franchise, behind me there's a Moonraker poster, a signed picture of George Lazenby, and on the other side there's a Thunderball poster. So, and then there's a bunch of James Bond pops behind me. So I love the franchise, and seeing what they did to Bond at the end of No Time to Die just always leaves me with such a sour taste.
Yeah,
so,
I get that. Going back to From Russia with Love.
Sorry,
That's all right. I loved the little scene in the mosque in Istanbul where Tanya and James Bond plan to meet and to exchange the plans of the Russian consulate. It's really kind of simple but clever stuff where Bond kind of enters first and signals to Tanya with his sunglasses to meet over there somewhere. There's this kind of beautiful shot where Bond is walking in front of these pillars and Tanya is walking in Bond's direction in Bond's direction in the background behind the pillars, and the camera pans round to reveal this Bulgarian agent working for the Russians waiting for her. And then Bond kind of backs up, hides his gun. Tanya plants the plans, and you think Bond knocks out the Bulgarian, but you see Bond still kind of getting in position kind of thing. And Grant did it, but kind of just walks away. So just kind of a great spy stuff with zero dialogue. Very simple, but just really kind of satisfying to watch, and just really, I think Terence Young was just had a very clear focus on how he wanted to frame that, not just in making it look really cool with background and foreground perspectives, but just making it really efficient and just beautiful to look at as well.
I think using efficient is a great way to describe the directing in this. Like, I don't think there's much flash, but I feel like it's always efficient and it's what the story needs to
Yeah.
get the point across as effectively as possible. So I definitely think efficient is a good way to describe it, especially that church scene. It's pretty great. The one thing that I always wish would be a lot clearer in the
Right.
book, it's crystal clear. In this, I think the whole thing where Bond and Tatiana are filmed having sex,
Right.
I think it kind of gets a little muddled and lost, and I'm not sure if that was them trying to censor that for like a 60s audience.
Okay.
In the book, it's a little more clear why it's being filmed. In the movie, I always find it a bit muddy.
Right. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Because there's a little just kind of off the cuff line from Grant, I think, when he's talking to Bond on the train about it, that they've got
Yeah.
that film, that they've had sex or whatever. But I think, like, I really quite like the last couple of action scenes, like the boat chase and the helicopter sequence. I think I preferred the helicopter sequence, though, as it felt a bit more, like, intense, and the camera angles they go for are really great. I love the use of kind of long lenses as the helicopter goes over the truck, and from the truck's perspective, it feels very close. Then when Bond kind of escapes the truck, the helicopter passes over Bond really closely. It definitely feels very close at times, and I loved how they achieved that with some onboard cameras in the helicopter. There's like a great shot where the camera's on the ground and the helicopter kind of whips by the camera, which again felt very close, and you see Bond dive off these rocks, and you see the helicopter kind of bank in the background as Bond comes back the other way towards the camera. Brilliantly choreographed without using like heavy cutting. And with the boat chase, like, it was like more focused on the fire sequence at the end, which to be fair felt like pretty intense, but I think I probably would have preferred more of a chase before that happens, but before the oil burns them up to a crisp. But yeah, I think I prefer the helicopter stuff to the boat stuff at the end.
I think it might be, in my opinion, I feel like it's almost one ending too many.
Yeah.
Like, because after he beats Red Grant, it's like such a great climax. And then, then we have another chase scene on the boat. And then we have the North by Northwest influenced helicopter thing. It's clearly North by Northwest influenced. And it just feels like if it was a modern movie, you probably are going to cut one of those. But because it's the 60s, they really want to give everyone their money's worth. So in this one, you get planes, trains, helicopters.
Boats.
They're giving you everything. And, the first helicopter crashed during production. They had to kind of rework it. It was like a disaster. Yeah.
Yeah, because the actual helicopter crash sequence, you can see the filmmaking there a little bit. But I can definitely give it a pass for, it's 1963, for God's sake. So,
So they were trying to use a real helicopter and crash it, but they had a calamity, which caused, a real injuries and stuff. It was actually a problem. And that's when they went to the miniatures.
Have you got a favorite scene or favorite shot from a directional point of view?
My favorite thing in the entire movie is I love everything with Grant and Bond finally getting together.
Yeah.
And I love in the book especially, they spend so much time with Grant's perspective, and like almost like the first half of the book is all about Grant's point of view in his life and like all this.
Right.
And in the book, Grant's a lunatic, like he goes crazy when the moon is out and stuff like that. There's a lot more subtext in the book too, or not even subtext. Things are a lot more explicit. Rosa Klebb in the book is almost like she's an outright lesbian, clearly in the book. In this movie, it's like hinted at and subtle, and she like forces herself on Tatiana in the book, and it's way more clear. And it's a Fleming thing where he has a lot of lesbians that James Bond has to turn straight. Almost, it's kind of a thing in his writing, and it's especially clear with Rosa Klebb. But in the movie, the scenes with Sean Connery and Robert Shaw together are just great. And he's saying old boy, and, Bond figures it out because of the wine and the fish, but he's still not sure. Like, everything is a little iffy.
Yeah.
And their confrontation on the train is a high point for the whole Bond series for action, because as fantastical as things can get within the series, it feels like a real fight in close quarters while they're on this train, Like, you're not going to be able to move around in a train booth. It's like two people fighting in a phone booth. What can you really do? It turns into like a grappling slugfest, and I've always loved how dirty and like nasty that fight feels. And they've tried to duplicate it several times. Even in Sean Connery's reign, they tried it again in Diamonds Are Forever, where he has the fight in the elevator.
Yeah, I do love that scene, and just like his iconic like way of wanting to kill people, using his watch, getting the zip cord out to strangle people, and that's ultimately how he dies as well. By Bond just takes it off him and kills him that way. Uses his favorite weapon against him. Yeah, I really kind of like a lot of the train stuff as well. Yeah, with Grant on the train. I loved the little scene where Karim Bey and Benz and the Russian security guy are left alone in a room, and you see Bond walk to the next car, and then like Grant comes into shot on the other side, nearest to the car, coming towards us. Then it cuts to the next scene with Bond, and you know exactly what will be revealed, that Grant has tied up some loose ends, which is exactly what happens. Then there's this like amazing simple sequence where the train stops at a station and Bond gets off and he's walking along the platform, and like Grant is following him from inside the train. When Bond stops, you can see Grant's reflection in the window. So good. Love that shot. Then there's this kind of great like subtle things going on the platform in Zagreb, where this time Grant gets off the train and meets Nash before Bond does, the MI6 agent who was supposed to like extract Bond and Tatiana from the border. But Grant gets his cigarettes out and sort of does this kind of gesture to say we haven't got time to do kind of the secret code word thing, and then leads him into the toilets. And if you look closely, you can see him get the wire out of his watch before they enter the toilets. And when like Grant comes out, he's wearing Nash's hat, and he's clearly like killed him off camera. And then when he meets Bond and gets his like cigarettes out, Bond is about to get on the train again. So the code words are kind of rushed again, so to get back on the train before it leaves. Just kind of brilliant stuff. No dialogue. It's all about like what the camera's doing, what's happening off camera, the choreography of the scenes, gesture work. Yeah, it's just so brilliantly done. Just kind of just pure spy stuff. No real, punches and kicks. Yeah, brilliant for me.
It's almost like a Licari thing, where it's like, it's real espionage. It's not James Bond, often veers into the world of like the fantastical, like science fact and science fiction almost. And this movie and Casino Royale in particular feel very real world espionage, where it's not too crazy, and like you could totally believe that this story happens in the 1960s until maybe like the end with the helicopter and the boat and stuff. But for the most part, all that like the lectern and the double agents is like, that's all kind of believable.
Oh yeah, exactly. There are no invisible cars in this movie for sure.
Yeah.
So directing score, Brian, what are you going for From Russia with Love? You may use a decimal point if you wish.
Hard. I'm deciding, do I rate it based on other Bond films or all films,
It's up
together?
To you.
I'm going to say it's not super flashy, has a couple of really great moments. I'm going to give it an 8.2.
8.2. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, I really kind of like this. As I said, it's just really clever, really efficient directing, and yeah, just really, really well done in how that, especially that all the train stuff is done, and with the mosque, and even with when it goes to like kind of big action with the helicopter and the gypsy stuff, that's really great as well, to be honest, especially the helicopters stuff. So I will go like an 8.5 for me.
Okay.
Screenplay, then. I love how simple the opening sequence is, because it's basically just a little like cat and mouse scene between Robert Shaw's Grant and James Bond. Like the way it's directed, it's like James Bond never has the upper hand, which is kind of a weird feeling when you watch it for the first time. There's a lot of like shots of Grant's shoes and James Bond looking quite nervous and literally fires his gun because he hears a loud noise. And you're like, that's not very James Bond-like behavior. What's going on? Then when Grant kills Bond, you're like, what the hell? Then pretty quickly it's revealed to be a nobody, like a Spectre, an unlucky Spectre agent. So for me, simple as it is, it's really effective. And it also kind of begs the question, why have we not had like another opening scene that sort of gives a big surprise or just bigs up the main or a villain of the film up a lot more, like in your opening scene? Like, also the Mission Impossible TV show producers in the 60s must have been like, you know what, we should use that. The whole mass gag thing.
Oh yeah, all the 60 spy TV shows have they owe a debt to James Bond.
Yeah.
And the masks had to have come from this, because it allows them to play with so much stuff. Yeah, I love that opening. I mean, it's cool, but I think the problem is,
right,
divorcing ourselves from seeing it for the first time in 1960s. We know, well, you're not killing James Bond within the first 5 minutes of the movie.
No.
So it's like, that's kind of the problem with that, right?
Yeah.
It builds up Grant, but no one thinks that James Bond is dead there. Maybe in the 60s it's a little different.
I don't think it was ever supposed to be like, oh my god, James Bond is... I don't think, even then, I don't think you're supposed to think like, oh, they've killed him. There's got to be something going on here. But I think it just makes you think for a second, like, huh? So I don't mind it too much. But so I think it's just really great for me because it's just so unique compared to a lot of the other movies. I mean, are you surprised that we haven't had kind of a scene like this since? Or would you want another kind of a surprise opening scene in future Bonds?
So it's interesting because I think they tried to do it with Jaws in Moonraker. He shows up, and it's a continuation of the Spy Who Loved Me. Sequence. Yeah, and there's that whole skydive sequence, which is pretty great. That's the one that's coming to mind right away as far as seeing like a henchman in action before meeting Bond. And, they had Bond fake his death at the beginning of You Only Live Twice. So as far as surprising the audience is kind of hard to do. I mean, Die Another Day, the first time I saw that, I thought that was a little surprising. I didn't think Bond would get captured like that. And I love the cold opens. I think it's a great way to kind of establish momentum and a tone of the movie and open with some fun. I love when it's completely disconnected from everything. Yeah,
I mean, Goldfinger's one is like that.
Oh, yeah.
It's not connected to the main story.
Oh, no. Goldfinger is just, here's a Bond action sequence,
Yeah. Fiore's Only, my favorite James Bond film. That's completely not connected. The opening scene in that where, he just tips, he kind of hooks Blofeld with a helicopter and just drops him down the chimney.
Yep.
Which is hilarious. Not related to the main story of that film at all.
Tomorrow Never Dies isn't related. The Living Daylights.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's always kind of fun seeing those just to kind of just get yourself raring to go for the movie. And I feel like this is the franchise where you can just get away with that. Like, you just make an incredible action sequence. It doesn't have to potentially have anything to do with the main story. Like no other like franchise can get away with doing that.
It's like, here's an appetizer,
Yeah.
and then the title sequence is like the I forget what it's called, but it's a palate cleanser,
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
So you
Bit
have
of
your appetizer
sorbet.
with, yeah, exactly. You have your opening action sequence. That's your appetizer. Then you cleanse your palate with the title sequence, and then you have your meal.
Yeah. Then Bond always gets his dessert at the end.
Oh yeah.
So what's kind of great about this story in From Russia with Love is that the mission in this is that effectively it's kind of a really easy mission for Bond when you think about it. Like Tatiana Romanov, like a Russian agent, wants to basically defect to England with the help of an English agent, James Bond. In exchange, she'll help the British get their hands on a Lecter, a decoding device. MI6 think it's all too easy, and they think it's a trap, but it's worth the risk to get their hands on a Lecter. But of course, it is all too easy. And at the start, like Spectre are pulling the strings and behind everything, and basically using Bond to do their job for them. And so, for most of the film, it's pretty plain sailing for Bond, I would say. But what's interesting is that this film is not from Bond's point of view, I wouldn't say. When we know Bond is being manipulated, but what we don't know is what part like Grant is going to ultimately play in this. Like, so he's like so far just keeping Bond alive halfway, the first hour of the film, keeping him alive until we get on the train. So as far as Bond is concerned, all he has to do is escape the train, and that's it. Job done. So it's just really interesting watching how Spectre are kind of manipulating things and Rosa Klebb and Grant, they're manipulating things while Bond and co think they have everything under control. So it's just really interesting watching the two different perspectives in this.
Yeah, especially on the heels of Dr. No, he killed a Spectre agent. So this movie is kind of all about Spectre trying to get their revenge for that, when you think about it. So Kronstein, who's like kind of the forgotten Bond villain, is, in my opinion, the real villain of the plot. Like, it's all his idea, and he has this big elaborate plan of, we're going to set this whole thing up, get James Bond to sleep with the Russian agent, and when we kill him, we'll make it look like the British agent James Bond was defecting to the Soviet Union, and we'll be able to slander MI6 and James Bond and make the whole unit look bad. And that's kind of Spectre's goal there. And Grant is just a henchman trying to push things along to get it to that end game. Like, if you think about it, Spectre was very close to winning. If Grant just kills him in that room, they put the tape there, they set everything up, and they leave with the lectern, and then they sell it to someone. Because MI6 and the Russians, and the Bond films do this a lot, they never really make the Russians the outright villains for the most part. There's usually some other force, whether it's Spectre or some multi-billionaire who is controlling things or trying to do something wacky. It's never the Russians or the outright bad guys. They're an element within the story. And that's kind of perfect in this, because that's what they are. They're being played too, and they don't realize it.
Well, yeah, Rosa Klebb used to work for Smersh, a Russian agent, under the guise of Spectre. So that's kind of a really interesting thing. I think the only other film where the Russians are the bad guys is GoldenEye, I think. I think that's the only one, really, isn't it?
Well, even that, it's not really the Russian
It's like
government.
a rogue general who wants GoldenEye, the device.
Yeah.
So, funny and interesting lines. There are a bunch. Get your Sean Connery accent ready. From now on, you will do anything this man says. And if I refuse, then you will not leave this room alive. From Rosa Klebb, which is cool.
That mouth is the right size. There's that one. And then I love this. This is a good hidden detail. So there's the scene where Bond and Karen Bay are sniping the Bulgar who just attacked the camp.
Yeah.
And Bond shoots him while the guy is like looking through this billboard of a movie. That movie is Eon Productions. It's one of their movies that they made.
Okay.
Yeah. And he shoots the guy through the window and he goes, "She should have kept her mouth shut."
Yeah, she should have kept her mouth shut. Darling Moneypenny, you know I never look at another woman. Oh, really, James? Another funny one between James and Tatiana when she's talking into the tape recorder disguised as a camera. And she says, the mechanism is, oh, James, will you make love to me all the time in England? Day and night. Go on about the mechanism. And then you have that brilliant, like, wide, awkward shot of all, like, M and everyone in there listening to it. Which is funny. The first one from Red Grant, the first one won't kill you, not the second, not even the third. Not until you crawl over here and you kiss my foot. From Robert Shaw before the fight starts.
Yeah, I also love, it's not a funny moment, but I love how Bond talks his way out of the situation where he's like, he's appealing with the gold sovereigns, you know?
Yeah.
He's like, I'll buy it with a pack of smokes, you know?
Yeah.
I love that whole sequence. So I love that. And I love when it piques his interest that Grant got red wine with fish. And he's like, you don't do that, you know?
Yeah, I should have known. Red wine with fish. But I think my favorite line, you mentioned it already, when Bond meets Tatiana in bed for the first time, and he says, "You're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen. Thank you, but I think my mouth is too big." No, it's the right size. For me, that is. And a nice smooch to follow. Cool. Right. Screenplay score, Brian, what are you going for From Russia with Love?
Ooh, I'm going to go a 9.1.
Ooh.
I think it's so, like, if you love spy shit and I love spy stuff,
yeah.
I think this, like, it doesn't get better than this, you know? It hits every beat I could want it to hit. Maybe it has one little action scene too much at the end. Just, I'll ding it a little for that, but, like, it's like perfection to me. Look, I'm such a Bond mark, it's hard for me to not just go 10s across the board. So, like, that's my instinct. That's my instinct.
Brian's going to go all 10s for both films.
I easily could, and like I'm trying not to be that guy. So like that's why I'm trying to. I'm harsher than I normally would. Like I'm pretty sure on my Letterboxd this has like a 5 stars. So I'm trying to not ruin your show where it's like all 10s.
So have you read all the Bond books?
I've read all the Fleming books. I haven't read the other authors, but I've read every Fleming book. I love James Bond. So
yeah, I've read a few of the Bond books, not all of them. I've not actually read From Russia with Love. I've read Goldfinger. I've read Thunderball, Live and Let Die, Casino Royale. So, would you say this is the most faithful adaptation? Because I know a lot of the films take sequences from each book and put them in different films. Because I remember quite clearly they use a whole sequence from Live and Let Die, the book, where Bond is being dragged along in a boat along the coral reefs, and they use that scene in Fiore's Only. So they do kind of do that, don't they?
Yeah, they take pieces.
Yeah. So
I would say this and Casino Royale are probably the two most faithful. This one probably, I'll say, is like 90% faithful from what I remember. I haven't read the book in a couple of years, but this is super, super accurate.
Awesome. So screenplay score for me then, I just really like how clever it is with just all the spy intricacies, with how like Spectre is manipulating everyone, and it's just great in just seeing, certainly in the train, it all goes back to the train scene where like Bond is just slowly working things out with Grant and things. He's trying to outwit Grant and vice versa on and off the train. So I'll go like a 9.2, I think. as you say, it's like as good as you're going to get in terms of a spy story.
Yeah.
And yeah. And it's got chess in it too. I like chess. So, acting. One of my favorite bits of acting in this film is when Sean Connery as James Bond, he goes into the Russian consulate before he goes and steals the Lecter, and he's looking at his watch waiting for the bomb to go off. And when it does go off, this huge explosion happens, obviously. And if you look closely, there's a great smile on Sean Connery's face when the explosion goes off. And you can clearly see him mouth, "Oh, shit." You know, like he wasn't expecting this massive explosion to happen. Which is so funny. Did you notice that?
I've never noticed that, but I got to go back and look.
Go back. He literally mouths shit.
I wonder if that was like a real thing. Like,
oh, yeah.
Like Sean, he wasn't ready for how big it was. He's like, oh, shit.
But yeah, I mean, I really liked Robert Shaw's acting when he pretends to be Nash to Bond on the train after Zagreb, where he puts on sort of a stronger English accent, and Sean Connery's great too, because they didn't have time to do the kind of the cigarette code word thing to confirm who they are before the train left the station, as I kind of mentioned in screenplay. So Bond is not totally sure that it is Nash. And like the subtle changes in Sean Connery's face are brilliant to watch. Like the looks he gives Grant are slightly too long. And when like Sean notices Grant put the drug in Tatiana's wine, he brilliantly hides that he notices that he's drugged the wine. But there's just enough there in Sean's face that we know that he noticed it, you know, if you know what I mean. Then I loved kind of Robert Shaw when Bond discovers him, where the accent kind of softens a little bit, and then when Grant gets the upper hand, like Shaw is a lot more stern, and you're like, Bond has definitely met his match here. Like the fight that follows, as you say, is just a brilliantly rough, pretty brutal, I would say, for the time, and just kind of like the messiness of it and the unchoreographed quality nature of the fight is just what you come for Bond films for me. And that's always kind of a great appeal for all the Bond films, is just kind of these rough and tumble fight scenes that don't feel choreographed at all. He's always kind of just using his environment, using whatever's available, be it gadgets or his fists or his feet, shoes or whatever. Yeah, I think that fight in particular kind of kick-started this, like, sort of, I don't want to say fighting style for Bond, but just kind of this style of action when it comes to fisticuff action.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they've been trying to top and duplicate this fight since it happened, because it's such an iconic, perfect moment of something that just feels real. If you could think of it real quick, because it's very far removed from this, but do you know the scene in Skyfall where Daniel Craig is in the tower and there's like the blue light and he's fighting the guy and they're like in silhouette?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That is so choreographed compared to this. Like the guy throws a kick, Daniel Craig blocks it, and it's way more like it feels like a movie fight. Where this feels like I put Sean Connery and Robert Shaw in a little compartment and I said, you guys fight to the death. Like I feel like that's what this would look like.
Yeah, so Terrence Young is just like, okay, go on then, go, fight.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not like that, because there are moments when you can kind of see the stunt doubles come into play or whatever, but that's only because we have, you know, more trained eyes when we watch films these days.
Super HD and, you know.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's so well done that it doesn't feel choreographed. And obviously it's all very planned and that, but to get that quality in this, when everything's kind of so smooth and efficient and slick, and then you get kind of this, it almost brings another unexpected quality to this film, because it is kind of rough and tumble. Yeah, it's great. Rosa Klebb is a great Bond villain for me. Like, she's not in the film that much, only a little at the beginning and at the end with her like famous shoe dagger that she tries to kill Bond with at the end. But when she is on screen, you immediately know she's a villain simply because of that striking face, and it ain't pretty. I like that little scene where she meets Grant for the first time and she's kind of slowly approaching him and puts the knuckle duster on, trying not to give anything away, and then hits him like super quick out of the blue to try and see if he would flinch or something. That was really cool. Plus, I really liked her scene with Tatiana Romanov when she's basically telling her to seduce Bond, and she goes from being quite stern and very Russian, frankly, to her, and then a lot softer, showing her feminine side very quickly, which I found was great, as you just don't know what you're going to get necessarily with Rosa Klebb.
It's funny because when you think of like the Austin Powers movies and what they're spoofing, like she has so little screen time, but she's so iconic that they felt the need to parody her, because that's how iconic of a character she is. Her and Oddjob are the two and Blofeld, but those are three clear Bond characters that they just kind of scooch over into Austin Powers. And Rosa Klebb is great. She's cunning. In the book, she's like a sadist, and she actually wins in the end of the book almost. Fleming was thinking about killing off Bond, and she actually does get him with the poison dagger. And the book ends with Bond being stabbed and falling asleep. And Fleming wasn't sure if he was going to bring him back, and then I think he got a bunch of letters and was like, okay. And then he wrote Thunderball. And that's why, because the movies are out of sequence from the books. Thunderball opens, it has a different action sequence, but then Bond goes to like a health spa, where it doesn't make sense. Thunderball, the book, starts right after From Russia with Love, and it's Bond recuperating from being stabbed with the poison knife.
Oh, okay. Because that isn't Live and Let Die like the second book, isn't it? And Goldfinger's quite late on in this book series as well.
Moonraker, I believe, is second.
Oh, okay.
Or Diamonds Are Forever is second. It's a weird order.
Yeah.
I know From Russia with Love is like 5 or 6. Because I think there's 12 or 13 Flemings, counting like some of the short stories that they collected in the books. And then The Man with the Golden Gun was the last book he was writing, and he died after he wrote like the first draft, which is what they put out. So that book is very sloppy when you read it, because you know it's not really finished. You know, you could tell that there was more work to be done.
Did it have a third nipple in that book, or did Scaramanga?
It did, yeah. There's a third nipple.
Cool. So yeah, that's pretty much everything for acting. Anything else for acting you want to mention?
Obviously Sean Connery's great in this. I think it's a very realistic, grounded portrayal of Bond. You could see he's starting to come into his own with the character and understand what he's doing. The one thing that I gotta knock this for is the female performance by Danielle Binacci. It's not her fault, but Eon dubbed all the female actresses, so we don't see her, we don't hear her performance. It's a different actress. So
who plays Romanov?
Danielle Binacci is Romanov, and you know she's dubbed because I think she's Italian, and she's dubbed by another actress whose name I forget. But it's kind of, it's almost unfair to the actresses. But how do you judge that performance when it's not the person doing it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. But do you have a favorite performance, or is that a silly question?
I gotta go Sean Connery.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, Sean Connery. I ask the same question every episode, so I know it's an obvious answer, but I gotta do it. Acting score then, Brian, what are you going for?
Ooh, it's tough. I love Robert Shaw in this. I love Connery. I'm going to go with an 8.8 just because I got to ding it a little just because Binaki is dubbed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll go pretty similar, I think. Yeah, this is definitely one of Sean Connery's best performances as James Bond, for sure. His best performance is probably Goldfinger for me, possibly. I haven't watched all of them in a while, but I'd probably go with that one for his best performance. But here, he's still great. And as I said, like, he just oozes this kind of masculinity and he's just effortless in the role. I can't really imagine anyone to kick things off with James Bond than Sean Connery. So, like Rosa Klebb, though, is really good. I know she's dubbed, but just great casting for that role in particular. As you say, like Robert Shaw, just you feel like he is James Bond's match in this, and that you're really looking forward to those two clashing in the movie at the end, and they don't disappoint. Even before the fight starts on the train, they don't disappoint with their interactions and their dialogue and the way they act together. So yeah, I'll go like an 8.6 for me.
And this should be said, I don't want to miss this, because
Sure.
I'll kick myself if I don't say this, but Pedro Armendariz playing Karen Bay was dying of cancer as he filmed this. He died like shortly after. I don't even know if he made it to the movie's release, but he's fantastic as well. Like, he's so warm, and he has one of the funniest moments in the movie too, when it's him with his wife and she's laying there all naked and she wants to have sex, and he's like, oh well, back to the salt mines. Like, I gotta do this. This beautiful woman wants me, and it's a really
saves his
funny
life
moment.
though.
Yeah, it does. But I love Karen Bay and Pedro Armendariz. I'm butchering his name. Armendariz, whatever. He's fantastic in this. So I definitely want to give him some props.
Yeah, he just kind of feels like a warm hug of a character in a weird way for a spy film. You feel like you can sort of relax into the film when he's on screen, when Bond is with him. Yeah, it's just a really kind of interesting character to help Bond on his quest. And you feel like in spy films there's always elements to a character where you're like, can you totally trust this character? I'm not sure. Whereas with this guy, like, you're very sure that this guy is an ally for Bond, and in very much a good way. It's like, I feel like you would be slightly shortchanged and it wouldn't work really if there was some dodgy elements to his character. Yeah, he's great as well. Right, let's add up the scores then for From Russia with Love.
Seems like it's going to be pretty high.
Yeah. From Russia with Love gets a very impressive 52.4. Excellent. Could be tough to beat. I think this could be a tight one, people.
This is going to be really tight, you know.
That's it for part 1. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Check out part 2 to see who wins. But don't stop there. Get involved and tell me what your favourite films are relating to the episode. Send us a DM or comment on Instagram and TikTok at Film vs. Film Podcast. For X at FVF_podcast. Plus, we are now on YouTube, so hit that like button and comment there. If you do, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Remember, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. Pod signing off.